last video we saw that ethical principles are based on reason applied to experience. And in this video we'll see how to develop ethical principles based on reason applied to experience. In particular, in this video we'll develop the most fundamental ethical principles using reason applied to experience. Now, in order to develop ethical principles, we must first ask what ethics is about. I invite you to pause the video on the next slide and answer the question. But if you'd like a hint, just keep on going. My hint is this. Suppose that you were the only person on the planet. I call this the isolation scenario. Suppose that you were the only person on the planet and that there were no animals. Is there anything that you could do that would be unethical? I invite you to pause the video on the next slide and answer the question. The isolation scenario reveals that ethics entails principles for relating to other people. If there are no people or animals, there is nothing that we could do that would be unethical, with one qualification. If we believe in God, then ethical principles would pertain to our relation with God. So ethical principles pertain to our relations with other people, including God, and ethical principles pertain to our relations with animals, shading from the higher animals, who are the most intelligent and personable, down to the lower animals. Okay, so we've established that ethics entails principles for relating to other people. Now, in order to develop ethical principles, we must also ask what human life is fundamentally about. I invite you to pause the video on the next slide and answer the question. Or again, if you prefer, continue with the video and I'll give you 2 hints. My first hint is as follows. Would you like to live a life in which you personally do all of the work to provide for your necessities? Food, clothing, housing, heating, cooling, transportation, education, medical care, dental care, etc. Would you like to take all of these responsibilities upon yourself? To make this question stark, suppose that you lived in an environment of extremes, such as Minnesota. For my next hint, let's return to the isolation scenario. Suppose that you were the only person on the planet. Would you find life meaningful? To make this question more poignant, suppose that you would never die, but instead you would live alone forever. Would you find life meaningful? I invite you to pause the video on the next slide and think about the 2 hints in order to answer the question as to what human life is fundamentally about. The first hint asked if we would personally like to provide for all of our necessities. And this offers us 2 insights. The first insight is that one of the fundamental facets of human life is the need to survive. The second insight is that one of the reasons that we relate to people is to enhance our survival. Most of us live in an environment where we could not survive by ourselves if we wanted to. But aside from bare survival, it is obvious that our life is tremendously enhanced through commerce. If any one of us were the only person on the planet, we certainly couldn't single-handedly create the vast knowledge and the sophisticated technology and the structures that the human race has today created. So our survival is greatly enhanced through commerce with other people. In short, the first hint reveals that one of the fundamental facets of human life is survival, and that our survival is greatly enhanced through relations with other people, in particular through commerce. I refer to this facet of human life as interdependence or mutual need. In the second hint, we return to the isolation scenario, and we asked if life without other people would be meaningful. The answer is a resounding no. Western religion even captures this theme in Genesis 2, where God brings all of the animals to Adam to find a companion for him. But no animal can provide Adam adequate companionship. Adam needs another human for adequate companionship. This also implies that God himself is not an adequate companion for Adam. So the isolation scenario reveals that we live for our relations with other people. Meaning in life comes from our relations with other people. And if we believe in God, we will include God among these people. I refer to this facet of human life as intimacy or mutual meaning. Now let's take a moment to review where we've come thus far. Ethics entails principles for relating to other people, and our relations with other people are fundamentally about interdependence and intimacy, mutual need and mutual meaning. I refer to this pair of concepts as the relational duality. So what are ethical principles about? Ethical principles are principles for realizing the relational duality. Ethical principles are principles for realizing interdependence and intimacy in our relations with other people. Ethical principles are principles for realizing mutual need and mutual meaning in our relations with other people. Now that we know what ethical principles are about, we can begin developing ethical principles. In this video, I'll develop the most fundamental ethical principle in order to illustrate the process, though this first principle is far more abstract than most ethical principles. As always, I invite you to pause the video on the next slide and solve the problem, namely, determining the most fundamental ethical principle. I'll provide 3 hints next if you'd like some hints. Here's the first hint. Suppose that a youth comes to you and asks you for a single principle about how best to relate to other people throughout their life. What would you tell them? Here's the second hint. What ethical principle is Jesus most famous for? And here's the third hint. What is the most famous statement in the American Declaration of Independence? I invite you to pause the video on the next slide and answer the questions. Here are my answers. As to a single principle, here's what I'd say. Learn to put yourself in the other person's position. Learn to look at a situation from the other person's point of view. As to Jesus, his most famous ethical principle is the Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Or in more modern language, treat others as you would like to be treated. As to the Declaration of Independence, the most famous statement is the Equality Clause. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. None of these principles is exactly the most fundamental ethical principle, but they approximate it. What is the most fundamental ethical principle? We'll see what it is in a subsequent part of this video.